Welcome to the MedEvidence podcast. This episode is a rebroadcast from a live MedEvidence presentation.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and Dr. Mayer. I want to welcome you to the B team. So we're officially announced from junior varsity, but we've worked on this, and hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation. And it couldn't be more topical with what's going on in the national political scene as well as our own regional political scene. And vaccination is, one of the major miracles of our centuries of medicine in general. And from a personal standpoint, I moved to Jacksonville in 1987, and we had our youngest daughter in 1990. And when she was about a year old, she got explosive diarrhea. I was at work, and luckily my wife is a neonatal intensive care nurse, and our baby became a floppy baby in the course of about 2 hours, and she rushed her to Wolfson's Children's Hospital, and she survived only because of the work Dr. Mayer had done there in establishing the emergency department, and she basically saved my kid's life. So I am thankful for that. And
thank you.
And it's not only my personal experience, but from a regional medical environment, there's not many cities that have the kind of quality pediatric care that we do here in Jacksonville. So we're all very thankful for that, especially me, and a lot of that work is thanks to Dr. Mayer.
Thank you.
With that being said, we're going to talk about vaccines, and when we talked about this, we thought we'd talk generally about vaccine biology a little bit, kind of the history of vaccines, and hesitancy and mandates with vaccines and how that kind of plays with our lives. So as Sharon had pointed out, this tends to be, it can be a rather heated topic, and having been in a few discussions about this and seen them go off the rails very quickly, if you have questions about it, you can use those same little yellow pieces of paper to take notes. They ask those questions at the end, but we'll try to be brief and to the point. So with that being said, when we talk about vaccines, what are we talking about in the process of vaccination? And the process of vaccination is introducing a harmless component of a pathogen, which we call an antigen, something recognized by our body as foreign. The immune system recognizes that and then mounts a response to the invader. That response kind of has three different arms. One is B cells are produced that make antibodies that bind to the antigen and then allow it to be killed by killer cells. And then we have the killer cells that actually destroy the cells that are infected and expressing that antigen. Then there are memory cells that are formed that, it's really remarkable, maintain the ability to produce those antibodies for years, even though they may never be challenged. But once they see that again, they produce those antibodies again quickly, and our body responds, and that's the kind of the basis for our immunity. So what's a vaccine? A vaccine requires an antigen in the form of a weakened, non-dangerous fragment of an organism. Classically, this was done by heating and almost killing the virus. That particle is then recognized as foreign, and our body produces antibodies against it. The word vaccine comes from the Latin vacca, which is cow, because initially the first vaccines that were developed for smallpox in the late 18th century by a physician, Edward Jenner, and he did that by using cowpox lesions on the sides of cow to get the pus out. And since the antigen between cowpox and smallpox was so similar, he immunized people with cowpox, and that protected them against smallpox. So this largely relates, when we talk about vaccines, to viruses, though we do have vaccines for bacteria, mycobacteria. Most commonly, you all have heard of pneumovax for pneumococcus, which is a bacterial infection, but primarily the majority of vaccines are against viruses, and someone once said that, a virus, simply put, is a piece of bad news wrapped up in a protein. There's very few viruses that are going to help you.
So simply putting, vaccine is basically you're getting a portion of a virus or a bacteria that's harmless, that's inactivated, and then your body is producing a response to it. And that's what's giving you immunity. So when you get that, you either don't get the disease when you come in contact with it, or you get a milder form of the disease.
That's exactly right. The kind of impact on the world in general is remarkable. If we look at different vaccines that have been developed and look at global death rates before vaccination, or our best estimate of global death rates, the impact of vaccines is beyond belief. If you look at smallpox, in the early 19th century, in the early 20th century, we were seeing 2 to 5 million deaths per year from smallpox. In fact, it was estimated that in the 20th century, before smallpox vaccine was developed, there were 300 million deaths worldwide from smallpox. Currently, zero.
Zero.
So if we jump down to measles, mumps, or what I had my child experience, rotavirus, you can see that there were 600,000 deaths yearly, and now there's essentially zero in the vaccinated population. And down to polio and tetanus. And some of these, the magnitude of the impact of the disease, we talk about diseases in populations, but on an individual basis, if you have someone who suffers polio and becomes handicapped from it, that's not just one individual that's affected, you're affecting an entire family.
Yes.
So the real impact of disease control is really minimized statistically by what we're presenting today.
So we're going to hold off on this slide for a second. So smallpox, as we said, 2 to 5 million deaths annually. And then we haven't seen a case of smallpox since 1970s, late 70s. Measles, 99.99% cure. In early part of 20th century, children were dying, before age 5, they were dying, about 20% of children would die from infectious diseases. And I think measles vaccine came around in 1960s. Before that, 400 to 500 children were dying every year in the United States from measles. Yeah, so the impact of these vaccination is amazing. We just need to keep recognizing that. Before vaccines, there was variolation. Inoculation dates back to the 1500s in Istanbul, and it was meant to protect the horrors of smallpox. It involved inoculating smallpox pus to create immunity. And they found an interesting way that they would actually take the pus from smallpox and create a wound on a healthy person and put that smallpox pus on that. And that actually did cause immunity in them, and they didn't get the severe disease, and they didn't die from it. It came to colonial America in 1716 with Onesimus, an enslaved man who informed his minister, Cotton Mather, owner. Hate to say the word owner, and variolation was considered the world's first successful vaccine. And actually, Edward Jenner, who developed a different technique with cowpox, he mentioned that a few minutes ago, and he actually got.
Interestingly, I didn't know this, but George Washington required any recruit for the colonial army to be vaccinated. And when they looked statistically at what was going on, because disease killed more soldiers than battle did, that George Washington's requirement for smallpox immunization probably led to our success in the war for independence.
Yes. And Jenner's method was used to eradicate smallpox altogether, and he was knighted by King George III. Again, objections to vaccination have been there for centuries. They can be religious, they can be scientific, they can be political, but in the end, we are here, we believe in science. Poliomyelitis. Polio was one of the most feared infections in the US. All over the world, actually, it was. And highly contagious, spread through coughing, sneezing, air droplets, saliva, feces. And it caused all kinds of problems, but mostly the effect that we were worried about was spinal cord involvement causing paralysis, or lung involvement causing respiratory issues, where they actually used iron lungs, which he seemed to have one, and I don't know what happened to it.
When I first came to town, I had, in my training, I had a patient on an iron lung, and one of the physicians that I was practicing with, his mother had been living in an iron lung for 40 years. And she passed away, and we had talked about it a few times, and he said, well, I have this iron lung, I don't know what to do with. And I said, well, it's really kind of like a museum piece. And so I hired a mover to pick it up, and we brought it over to my garage, and every day my wife would get the kids in the car, and she'd say, well, what are you doing with this? And I said, well, I'm trying to figure it out, but it's not, how often do you see an iron lung? And one day she had it taken to the
I know.
the metal recycling yard, and that was the end of it.
So paralysis of the chest muscles would impair breathing, and that's what required the iron lung. And I wish we had one here to show one today. In 1952, 60,000 children were infected in the US, causing nearly 3,000 deaths. So who was a famous person who had? Yes. So polio vaccine, Dr. Jonas Salk. I think everyone has heard of Salk and Sabin, and they are the ones who developed the vaccines. Interestingly, like a crazy physician, he not only administered it to healthy people, including himself. So all the recipients, they developed antibodies, and there was no significant side effects from the vaccine. And then they actually tested over 1 million children before actually it was given to the general public. And now polio is completely eradicated.
Yep.
Measles. I was born in India, went to medical school in India, and then did rest of my training here. Saw tons of measles with terrible effects. Measles pneumonia causing lots of death, measles encephalitis causing developmental delay, long-term effects of measles, and it's called panencephalitis. That actually is a death sentence. So saw tons of that.
And since I was just doing adult medicine, if you had an adult with measles, the death rate was about 15%, and if they developed measles pneumonia, the death rate was in excess of 50%. So I had one patient, when I first came to town, we had one patient who had measles pneumonia. He was 25 years old and was in the ICU forever and didn't survive.
Right. So in the island populations, first example we're giving here is Faroe Islands. The population there was only 7,800, 75% people were affected, and 170 deaths. In Hawaiian Islands, when measles came around, 30% of the population died. And these are people who haven't been exposed to measles, and suddenly they get this wild form of measles. And in Fiji Islands, 1/3 of the population died, affecting all age groups. And if you compare that to COVID, yes, COVID was terrible. We had millions of people die, but that was only 1% of the population. Here we're talking about 33% of the population dying. During World War I, 3,200 US troops died from measles and complications of measles. So miracles of vaccination, my favorite topic. In 1963, first licensed measles vaccine, both killed and live attenuated vaccines were introduced. Combined MMR vaccine was introduced in 1971. And now it's given in 2 dosages. And extensive vaccination, measles has come down significantly globally. Between 2000 and 2020, measles vaccines prevented an estimated 57 million deaths globally. But now with vaccine coverage gaps, measles is re-emerging, and it's a dangerous precedent. And again, this is a vaccine you can't give to pregnant women because it's a live vaccine. You can't give to immunocompromised children. So we really do need herd immunity of people, healthy people having the vaccine.
And I think the gaps that are developing are voluntary gaps.
Yes,
people are choosing not to get vaccinated.
Yes. Measles risk and safety. According to CDC, 1 in 4 people with measles require being in the hospital, and 1 to 2 in 1,000 measles patients die. if you see the serious harm, people say, with vaccines, and these are claims, I don't think scientifically that many of them have been proven, that's only 2 per 1 million doses. So as you can see, vaccine is a lot safer than the disease.
2 per million. As always, there are nutty people in medicine, like in every industry. And in 1998, the kind of anti-vaccine philosophy kind of started to peak, and that was primarily based on one study by this physician, Andrew Wakefield, and he published it in Lancet, which is like a life magazine for medical people, and falsely suggested a link between the MMR vaccine that Dr. Mayer was just talking about and autism. And it was methodologically flawed. It was based on 12 cases. And investigators had revealed that there were other motivations that led to these fraudulent findings, including primarily financial motives from competing companies and from parents and from lawyers, surprisingly. Wakefield's license was subsequently revoked, and because of this stir of an association between vaccination and autism, the literature has been reviewed for the last for decades, and trying to find and establish a link between vaccinations and autism. And with the best scientific methods that we haven't been able to establish any kind of a link.
Yes, none of the studies have shown that there's any link between any of the vaccines and autism.
In fact, his 9 co-authors on the paper all admitted their dishonesty and irresponsibility and unethical practices. He didn't, but they did. So the following fraudulent claim made by Wakefield, a decade of rigorous research, has consistently shown that there is no link that we know of currently between any vaccine and autism. Now, this is, like all medicine, it's a changing environment. As we get better and more advanced and have a broader exposure to things could develop that we don't know about today. But as of today, there is no scientific link between vaccination and autism. Further vaccination progress occurred with influenza vaccine. In 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic killed 50 million people worldwide in the course of a couple of years. In the 1930s, researchers were able to isolate influenza virus and begin early vaccine trials using inactivated viruses. And the way they were able to isolate it was in the 1930s, the electron microscope was developed. And they were able actually to visualize viruses and could see that there were different forms of different viruses, and they started to categorize viruses into different classes. And from 42 to 45, the first effective inactivated influenza vaccine was developed with the U.S. Army support. In 1945, influenza vaccine became approved for military use, and the following year it became approved for civilian use.
Civilian use, yes.
So between the 1960s and the 1970s, we started to understand that influenza was just more than a single entity, that there was A and B components, and this was again discovered through molecular studies as well as electron microscopy. 2003, the first live attenuated influenza vaccine in the form of a nasal spray was released, which was a big step forward for people that didn't like using needles. So I have a personal disaffinity for jab. Whenever the newscasters or anybody talks about getting the jab, it kind of does something negative to me, but I don't like jabbing. So in 2012, a quadrivalent influenza vaccine was approved to cover additional flu strains. And then in the early 20s, a couple of years ago, the first mRNA influenza vaccine received regulatory approval, representing a new era of rapid, adaptable flu vaccine technology. Now, up till then, and currently, we base the vaccine formulation on what we predict the type A and B is going to be, and we're not always right. So some years, we have a good match with what the infection with a flu subtype actually circulates is, and some years we don't. This mRNA technology allowed us to absolutely perfectly match in a short period of time what the vaccine was going to be for the actual virus that was circulating. So that was one of the plus sides of mRNA technology. And the other thing about mRNA technology was the development time. So classically, it took 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine and bring it to the public. With newer technology and advance in all of our scientific procedures, we were able to produce vaccines within 2 years, which is remarkable in terms of the lives it could save and just in general in terms of an industrial, achievement.
But the vaccines that we are all getting now for influenza is not mRNA.
Right.
It's a killed killed vaccine, actually, so non-mRNA.
So we're still in the phase of doing the best we can with the information we know instead of matching it completely.
And that's, you kind of guess the strain that's going to be coming next year, and then you do it in the egg cell, so it takes time to develop that vaccine. And mRNA is, you're taking a part of the virus, and it's a quick production, but again, with mRNA concerns and, live, the other influenza vaccine is the better vaccine right now. So we come to mRNA, COVID-19.
That was our segue.
Yes. So first identified in late 2019 in Wuhan, China, and declared a pandemic by WHO in March of 2020. We all know that. The US launched Operation Warp Speed in 2020 to accelerate vaccine development. FDA granted emergency authorization to Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines. And these were the first mRNA vaccines. And variants like Delta and Omicron emerged, driving ongoing booster development and updated recommendations. And the end of global emergency was in May of 2023, but we still see COVID-19. It's an endemic disease now. It still is very much prevalent. It still causes hospitalizations in sick and older people and very young people and immunocompromised people. The mRNA part of it is what saved all the millions of people. So estimated lives saved by vaccination. They have had some models that they have mathematical modeling. They estimated that COVID-19 vaccination saved approximately 31.4 million deaths. Vaccination efforts are estimated to have prevented 19.8 million deaths, representing 63% reduction in total deaths. The countries that did not make their target of vaccination, and these are low-income, middle-income countries, if they had made their target, they would have saved at least another 600,000 people. Now, question for the audience. Raise of hand. COVID-19 vaccination has been associated with myocarditis. True or false?
How many think it's true? How many think it's false?
How many think it's false?
So the fact that the vaccination has been associated with myocarditis
is false.
No. Right. So
it can cause, but COVID-19 itself causes a lot more myocarditis than the vaccination. So vaccination can cause it, but myocarditis is 7 times more common following the disease, following the infection, than after COVID-19 vaccination.
So how many of you had heard about the vaccine causing myocarditis?
Everyone.
How many of you had heard that the infection causes myocarditis? Yeah, I think that, this is one of these kind of social media effects where you hear the bad news, but nobody gives you the counter side as to what the actual numerical scientific truth is.
And bad news travels fast.
Right. So. If you're looking for bad stuff, you're going to find it.
Yes.
So this led to the whole idea of vaccine hesitancy and mandates, which currently are kind of what's on the plate socially as well. So which of the following statements is the most accurate definition of vaccine hesitancy? A, an unacceptable distance or travel to immunization clinics. B, willing to receive vaccines despite negative adverse effects from previous vaccinations. C, delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines despite availability and strong supporting evidence, or D, low vaccine uptake due to unavailability of vaccines. Who thinks it's A? Who thinks it's B? Who thinks it's C?
Great audience.
Yeah, everybody
Smart
knows.
people here.
Yeah, that is the truth. So, as Dr. Mayer had pointed out before, vaccine hesitancy has been around as long as vaccines have. There's multiple bases for why people become hesitant on vaccination. Starting, like we said, in the 19th century, there's ethical discussions focused on vaccine mandates, and nobody likes to be told what to do. That's the bottom line. If there's a mandate out there, you're going to get opposition to it from somebody about everything. Researching and testing with vulnerable groups, there's informed consent issues, there's disparities in vaccine access that have people kind of on the fence about things. Mandates, and the aim of a mandate is to protect public health, but can conflict with individual or religious beliefs. Global immunization efforts have saved over 150 million lives in the last 50 years alone, with measles vaccine being responsible for the largest share until COVID. And when the WHO was looking at the development of vaccine hesitancy, which is now one of the top 10 leading fears for health impact on humans. So it's among the top 10 leading problems that the WHO has identified as a healthcare issue, is vaccine hesitancy. They developed initially what's called the 3C framework. And the 3C framework was based on complacency, not viewing the disease as high enough risk so vaccination wasn't necessary. And when you live in an environment where there's herd immunity and you're not seeing people with the disease, your perception of what the disease severity is and how it's going to affect you becomes altered. You don't really have a sense of the disease that you don't know about. You don't know what you don't know. Convenience, practical hurdles, if the clinics that are giving vaccines are too far of a drive, or there's too much paperwork, or you have to get pre-approval, that can lead to vaccine hesitancy. And then confidence, lack of trust in the safety and effectiveness of vaccines, the system that delivers them, and the policymakers involved. And after watching congressional hearings yesterday, I was relieved that medical misinformation isn't just the privy of one party. Yeah. Both parties have it. So, and part of this problem also is us as a medical community, our ability to communicate what we need to communicate and tell the public what we know and what we don't know has added to this problem of hesitancy.
Yes. So delayed population level control. Again, main concern with vaccine hesitancy and insufficient herd immunity is that unvaccinated individuals can act as a reservoir. And this situation leads to outbreaks, putting community health at risk. And if you look at the picture of these two young children are not immunized, and the grandfather is not immunocompetent, has cancer, or grandmother has a disease, rheumatoid arthritis, she's taking biologics for it, they're taking steroids for it. That causes a lot of danger in the immediate family, but it also causes danger in the community. Risk perception misinformation. Attention is often focused on perceived risk of vaccination rather than the actual risk posed by infection. And that's what I'm seeing now in the emergency room. These young physicians and parents have not seen deaths from H. influenza meningitis, deaths from H. influenza pneumonia, deaths from diphtheria. And having experienced that before the H. flu vaccine was available, we would do 3 or 4 spinal taps in a day in sick children and find 1 or 2 patients with meningitis. And these children would have seizures, they would have developmental delay. If they had pneumonia, I actually saw a patient that had small pneumonia with fever and younger than 1 year of age, and then progressed to bloodstream infection and actually lost all fingers and all toes from gangrene. So the devastation those infections caused are gone because of the vaccination. And now we are coming to that end where people think, oh, these diseases are not dangerous, which is not true.
And if you think about it, you take a healthy human and you inject them with something to prevent a disease they don't have. So we prove that vaccines work on population levels. So we take the experience of millions of people on a vaccine, whether it helps prevent disease. So we're actually trying to prove a negative.
Correct.
So if you have a healthy kid and they get a vaccine and there's an adverse effect from the vaccine, your mind's made up that vaccines don't work. So it's a difficult hurdle to kind of get over with the public, and our ability to kind of communicate that, because the public works on a personal level. Their spouse, their child, their uncle, their friend, this happened to them when they got the vaccine.
Right.
They're not seeing what happened and what we prevented in millions of people.
You talked about rotavirus. There was 1 year, I think there was 200,000 emergency visits for rotavirus. And we would literally admit 4, 5, 6 children to the ICU every day with dehydration, kidney failure. And the vaccine came, and the next year there was hardly any rotavirus. And year 2, and this is an oral drops, oral vaccine, year 2, we did not see any rotavirus, none whatsoever. And in the last 10 years, I don't think I have seen any rotavirus cases.
Amazing.
So, yes. Social media contributions. I don't think social media contributes very well to this topic.
Well, it does. Just not,
Lots of misinformation, and most of the misinformation in social media is about vaccines, and that leads to refusal of vaccinations and delay. Search algorithms, they're obviously based on what you look for. So if you are looking for something all the time, that's what's going to come up first. Social media has become the main channel for inaccurate mass misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to hear when you see it in commercials, you see it on newscasts. You have, somebody who works as a truck driver who says, well, I did my research on vaccination. And I'm like, well, how did you do that research, and how did you do it, and where'd you get your information from? On, in the social media, on the internet, you don't know whether they're reporting results of a well-done study that's scientifically accurate and dependable, what the level of confidence that they have in their issues. They'll put anything on the internet
Or it's just
for
hearsay.
anybody to read.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for bad news, I doubt anybody is searching for vaccine benefit. Everybody's searching for vaccine adverse effects, vaccine complication, and
vaccine concerns.
and that's where it happens.
Yes.
So then it kind of develops the whole issue of mandates. And we've actually had vaccine mandates for 50 years in this country. Most of us unconsciously didn't recognize it, that, to get into school, you had to have vaccines, and we all thought that was appropriate, and kids weren't getting those diseases, so it really wasn't much of a problem. So the major the major voices that are kind of against vaccinations being mandated are along the philosophical lines of my body, my choice. The child's body can protect itself without vaccination is an argument that's gained some steam in the last several years. Parents underestimate the direct threat to their child of preventable diseases because they haven't seen them, because we've been preventing them. And then there's the limited role of government and the primacy of individual liberty and freedom. And I think we all understand that to some level, kind of those sentiments. Debating the vaccine mandates in terms of those most common arguments that are put forth in terms of why mandates should be in place is that we're preventing harm to others. Philosophically, individuals should be free in making their own decisions if their actions are not harmful to others. That's known as the harm principle. We have that for drunk drivers. We have that for people that buy guns. We have that for a lot of things. If their decisions harm others, then government coercion and restriction of liberty may be justified. And during COVID, we had severe limitations on liberty. And before we understood what was going on, there wasn't much pushback on that. The public was scared enough to know that, well, if I stay inside, I'm going to be safe. And people stayed inside. And it was only as information started to develop and people got, claustrophobic that there started to be some pushback on that. So the ethical justification for mandatory vaccination is that it has to be
Public
a
health
public
threat,
health
yes.
threat of significance.
Absolutely.
That there has to be confidence and safety in the effectiveness of the treatment, meaning the vaccine has to be safe and effective, and that the predicted value or benefit exceeds the alternative. So is there an alternative treatment to what can harm the population in general? So that's kind of the framework for why the government decides to make vaccinations or any treatment mandatory.
And as much as people dislike the vaccine, COVID vaccine, it saved many, many, many lives, and it was
Millions.
needed at that time. Understanding vaccine hesitancy. Again, misconceptions, misinformation, again, has gone on throughout history. Personal biases, and there's a lot of those, but again, there's no quality science that proves that those are true. And again, people want to hear what they want to hear and what feels good to them. And I see that a lot in young mothers that I see in the emergency room, teenage moms, my teenage friend has a child, they didn't vaccinate, and their child is doing fine, so I'm not going to get the shots. So personal bias, yes. Causes, misinformation, disinformation, we know that. Socioeconomic factors, very important. If you don't have transportation and you have 3 children and 2 go to school, you're not going to take your baby for the shots. You don't have any way of doing that. Cultural and religious beliefs. Again, I haven't found anything anywhere I've read that any religion says you shouldn't get vaccines, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think some of it was the production of vaccine that involved, incubating for some classes. There was some cloning information that got out to the the marketplace.
But I don't think anywhere it said vaccines are prohibited.
That I agree with.
Political polarization, we are going through that again, and distrust in research and science is a big thing.
Yeah, and the medical community hasn't been perfect on this, and nobody forgets that. So there were some strategies to address hesitancy that include more effective communication, motivational interviewing, clear recommendations is what we were doing, community engagement, local leaders, educational events. Who should be giving this message is, it's not just the message, it's the messenger also. Do you trust?
Who do you trust to give that message?
Is it your doctor that you trust, or is it somebody from your political persuasion that you trust? Where are you getting your information from, and how effective is that person in delivering quality information to you?
I had a lot of help from grandmothers. Right. I could always tell the grandmothers, okay, talk to her and see. And grandma would always convince them. And these are kind of questions for all of us to answer, is that we don't really know what the best method is. There's a method called a nudge method, where if the pharmacy gives you a telephone call or a text that your vaccine is due and sends you a letter, that gets people to get vaccinated more than not. Linking vaccination with goals for people. I don't know how that kind of translates into today's society that well, but to get into the Army, for example, you have to have certain vaccinations. To get into this country, you used to have certain vaccinations. Yes,
but that no longer seems to be all the issues that are out there. On a personal level, families could have goals in terms of, if you have a kid who is an asthmatic and you don't want them to have an exacerbation of their asthma, keeping them out of the hospital, this might be a way to help do that. Would definitely be a way to help do that. The same for a parent with COPD.
So public health importance of vaccine, and we all understand that. Open dialogue and respectful listening. As much as we want to bring scientific evidence, again, it's your decision. It's freedom of choice here. It's the parents' decision. But if you have an open dialogue and listen and have the motivational kind of interviewing, yes, people will listen to that. Highlight the role of education and empathy, and understand the past and present to build a healthier future.
So, in conclusion, there's been a rise currently in controversy surrounding vaccines and vaccine progress and techniques. Outbreaks of preventable diseases were seen in this country in under and unvaccinated populations, and that's heightened public concern, as it well should. Vaccines are overwhelmingly more safe than the diseases they prevent. Hesitancy remains a major healthcare concern. Various criticisms, whether accurate, unfounded, or simply perceived, can influence how people view vaccines.
Absolutely.
And I remember during COVID, there was some type of a congressional discussion going on Zoom. So one of the congressional members was at their home, in their home, with a mask on, doing Zoom, because there's computer viruses. And they were worried about that.
Says a lot about our Congress.
Yeah. So at that point, I think Dr. Mayer and I would end our presentation. Since we're both kind of scientifically oriented and we've both had experience in the real world, in populations and in using vaccines, and we know the power of their preventative potential.
Absolutely.
We both are biased, obviously, in favor of vaccines that are proven to be safe and are proven to be effective. And but there are other
and
opinions
we're always
out there.
looking at it. We are
Right.
still doing studies on everything. We are always looking into, will this cause any adverse effects? But I want to read the FMA's statement yesterday. From what I hear, and I never heard what the governor said about vaccine mandates, because from what I understand, there was something about they're going to not
They're going to remove
the requirement
for
yes.
the school mandates.
Yes. So Florida Medical Association yesterday said, on behalf of our 23,000 members, FMA supports the vaccination and immunization of school-age children against diseases that decades ago proved life-threatening to our children. It advocates for physicians and their patients to promote public health, ensure higher standards of medical practice, and enhance quality and availability of health care in the Sunshine State. This includes the safe and effective administration of vaccines and immunizations based on years of research and efficacy.
Thanks for joining the MedEvidence podcast. To learn more, head over to MedEvidence.com or subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform.